Welcome back, everybody. Um, it is about to be 2. Wait a couple of seconds till we get some viewers in. Um, Happy New Year. Uh, Welcome back to the Teal Talk Tuesdays. My name is Patricia Gatonis. I'm one of the Education and Outreach Specialists at SARC, the Sexual Assault Resource Center. And we are still providing virtual education and outreach as well as virtual counseling, as well as our 24/7 crisis hotline. So please, if you guys feel free to comment down below, say hello, any questions, concerns, feel free. Just know that on Facebook, on social media, it is not confidential. So if you do have something to say in confidentiality, please feel free to call our 24/7 crisis hotline at 979-731-1000. I will be touching on a couple of subjects that may have triggering effects for some few individuals. So if you do have any type of crisis, feel free to call our 24/7 crisis hotline. In today's Teal Talk, we're going to be talking about human trafficking. So what exactly is human trafficking, and what isn't human trafficking? Well, to put it simply, human trafficking is the business of stealing freedom for profit. So it's basically an extreme version of exploitation of humans. In some cases, traffickers trick, they defraud, or they physically force victims into providing commercial sex. In other cases, victims are lied to, they're assaulted, threatened, or manipulated into working under inhumane, illegal, or otherwise unacceptable conditions. It is a multi-billion dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to over 20 million people across the world. So the U.S. law defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts or labor or services against his or her will. The one exception involves minors and commercial sex. So inducing a minor into commercial sex is considered human trafficking regardless if there's presence of force, fraud, or coercion. And I will be delving into those three components as well, in addition to a couple of myths and facts, as well as indicators and signs of human trafficking. So first and foremost, I want to discuss with you the action means purpose model. So basically, the action means purpose model can be helpful in understanding the federal law of human trafficking. So human trafficking occurs when a perpetrator, often referred to as a trafficker, takes an action, and this action can include, to induce, recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining an individual or human life. And then from there, they employ the means of force. So that's where the force, that fraud, or that coercion component comes in. And to kind of give you guys an idea and examples of that force, fraud, or coercion, examples of force may mean, either they've been beaten, there's burned, branding, or tattooed, torture, there's drug addiction, there's confinement, as well as seasoning or grooming an individual, and also it's commonly known as trauma bonding, and also sexual assault. Those are several things that fall under that force component. And in terms of fraud, there's false promises, there's marriages, employment, deceitful, enticing, and affectionate behavior. Maybe they're withholding wages, misrepresenting working conditions, or misrepresenting the promise of a better life. And so that coercion aspect, those include threats of serious harm or restraint, and intimidation and humiliation, as well as emotional abuse, and the control of daily lives and brainwashing, threats to family members, deportation threats, and confiscation of documents. So those can fall under coercion. And I'll kind of delve a little bit more into depth as we go on into this discussion. So yeah, those means are that force, that fraud, or coercion. And then there, it's for the purpose of compelling the victim to provide commercial sex acts or labor or services. So those two types of human trafficking, one being commercial sex or sex trafficking, and the other is labor or services, which is labor trafficking. So I know you guys may have a lot of questions, and hopefully I can answer these in this short amount of time. But who exactly is vulnerable in these human trafficking cases? You know, how many people are affected in the United States every year? Well, according to the Polaris Project, which operates the National Human Trafficking Hotline as well as the Be Free text line, in 2017, so this is a couple of years ago, Polaris worked on over 8,000 cases of human trafficking, and these cases involved over 10,000 individual victims, nearly 5,000 potential traffickers, and over 1,000 trafficking businesses. So human trafficking is notoriously underreported, and is still underreported to this day. So as shocking as these numbers may be, they are only likely a tiny fraction of the actual problem. So who exactly is vulnerable? Well, human trafficking can happen to anyone, but some people are more vulnerable than others. So there are significant risk factors, and that includes either recent migration or relocation, substance use, mental health concerns, involvement with children or the welfare system, or maybe being a runaway or a homeless youth as well. So often, traffickers identify and leverage their victims' vulnerabilities in order to create that dependency. So, who exactly are these traffickers? Well, perpetrators of human trafficking can span all racial, ethnic, and gender demographics, and are as diverse as survivors. So some use their privilege, their wealth, and their power as means of control, while others experience the same socioeconomic oppression as their victims. So these include individuals who are business owners, maybe members of a gang or a network, parents or family members of victims, intimate partners, owners of farms or restaurants, and powerful corporate executives or government representatives. So those anybody can be a trafficker, basically. So how exactly do traffickers control their victims? Well, they employ a variety of control tactics, but the most common include physical and emotional abuse and threats, isolation from friends and family, and economic abuse. So they make promises aimed at addressing the needs of their target in order to impose that control and that power. So as a result, these victims become trapped and fear, leaving for several reasons, a myriad of reasons, including that psychological trauma, that shame, that fear, that emotional attachment they may have to their trafficker, or maybe even physical threats to themselves or their family. So victims and survivors of human trafficking represent every race, every ethnicity, but some forms of trafficking are more likely to affect specific ethnic groups or more vulnerable populations. Oh, also, by the way, check out this awesome sweatshirt at Sark. If you would like one of these sweatshirts, feel free to follow all of our social media for that. These proceeds benefit our counselors for, being able to provide their healing journeys and assist with their healing journeys for survivors. So a couple of myth and facts that I want to tell you guys, and feel free to write down in the comments down below or just in your head. It's totally fine. But here are some myth and facts and some common misconceptions of human trafficking. So one myth is that human trafficking is always or usually a violent crime, and that is not necessarily true. So by far the most pervasive myth about human trafficking is that it is always or often it involves kidnapping or otherwise physically forcing someone into a situation. But in reality, most human traffickers use psychological means such as tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening victims into providing that commercial sex or providing exploitative labor. Another myth is that all human trafficking involves commercial sex. The reality is human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to get another person to provide labor or commercial sex. However, worldwide, experts believe that there are more situations of labor trafficking than of sex trafficking. So, however, there is much wider awareness of sex trafficking in the United States rather than labor trafficking in the US. Another myth that I wanted to let you guys know is that a lot of people think that human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. And the reality is, human trafficking cases have been reported and prosecuted in industries including restaurants, cleaning services, construction, factories, sweatshops, massage parlors, and much, much more. So that is another misconception as well. And another myth is that only women and girls can be victims of sex trafficking. So that is not true either. One study estimates that as many as half sex trafficking victims and survivors are male. So advocates believe that that percentage may be even higher, but male victims are far less likely to be identified, especially LGBTQ plus boys or young men. They are seen as particularly more vulnerable for trafficking as well. Another myth is that all commercial sex is human trafficking. So that is not true either. All commercial sex involving a minor is legally considered human trafficking. However, commercial sex involving an adult is human trafficking if the person provided commercial sex, doing so against his or her will as a result of force, fraud, or coercion. And another myth I wanted to let you guys know is if the trafficked person consented to be in their initial situation, then it cannot be human trafficking or against their will because they knew better. So that is false as well. Initial consent to commercial sex or a labor setting prior to acts of force, fraud, or coercion, or if the victim is a minor in a sex trafficking situation, it is not relevant to the crime, nor it is payment. So just kind of let you guys know as well. One more thing that I did want to say that a lot of people get misconstrued. A lot of people think that human trafficking and human smuggling are the same. So human trafficking is not the same as smuggling. Trafficking is based on exploitation and does not require movement across borders. Smuggling is based on movement and involves moving a person across a country's border with that person's consent in violation of immigration laws. Although human smuggling is very different from human trafficking, human smuggling can turn into human trafficking if the smuggler uses force, fraud, or coercion to hold people against their will for the purposes of labor or sexual exploitation. So under federal law, I just want to note once again, every minor induced to engage in commercial sex is a victim of human trafficking. So I wanted to give you guys a couple of signs in terms of being able to recognizing those signs of human trafficking or maybe indicators. So like I said before, who exactly is the most vulnerable? Anyone can experience trafficking in any community, just as anyone can be the victim of any kind of crime. So while it can happen to anyone, evidence does suggest that people of color and LGBTQ plus people are more likely to experience trafficking than any other demographic groups. So not only do generational trauma, historic oppression, discrimination, and other societal factors, and inequities create community-wide vulnerabilities. So traffickers recognize and take advantage of people who are vulnerable. So people who may be vulnerable in trafficking, if they have an unstable living condition, they have previously experienced other forms of violence such as sexual abuse or domestic violence, or maybe they've run away or are involved in the juvenile justice system or child welfare system. Also, they may be undocumented immigrants or are facing poverty or economic need. Also, maybe they have a caregiver or a family member who has a substance abuse issue or are addicted to alcohol and drugs. So those those may be individuals that are likely to be more vulnerable to trafficking. So, in terms of how do traffickers lure people in, so here are a few situations that may raise concerns. For example, let's say a would-be employer refuses to give workers a signed contract or asks them to sign a contract in a language that they can't read, or possibly a would-be employer collects fees from a potential worker for the opportunity to work in a potential job or in a particular job, as well as maybe a family, a friend, a coworker or a student is newly showered with gifts or money, or otherwise becomes involved in an overwhelmingly fast-moving and asymmetric romantic relationship. And maybe, for example, there's a large difference in age or financial status, or maybe a friend, a family member, or a coworker or student is newly showered with gifts or money, in terms of maybe being a frequent runaway or maybe staying with someone who is not their parent or their guardian, or maybe that family member, that student, is developing a relationship that seems too close with someone who that they know solely through social media, or maybe they're showing signs of abuse. In addition to this, maybe they're offered a job opportunity that seems too good to be true, or are recruited for an opportunity that requires them to move far away, but maybe their recruiter or their prospective employer avoids answering their questions or is reluctant to provide detailed information about the job. So these all can be some weapons. These are stories that become weapons in the hands of human traffickers. And these are tales of maybe their romantic love everlasting, or about good jobs and fair wages just over the horizon. But, sometimes these stories may raise red flags. So being able to properly recognize either labor trafficking or sex trafficking is extremely important. So someone may also be experiencing labor trafficking or exploitation if they feel pressured by their employer to stay in a job or a situation that they want to leave, or maybe they owe money to an employer or recruiter, or not being paid what they were promised to or are owed. In addition to, they do not have control of their passport or other identity documents, or maybe they're working and living in isolated conditions. They're largely cut off from interaction with others or support systems, and possibly appear to be monitored by another person when talking or interacting with them. So many of these factors, as well as being threatened by their boss with deportation or other harm, or are working in dangerous conditions without proper safety gear, training, adequate breaks or protections, and are also living in dangerous, overcrowded, or inhumane conditions provided by an employer. So in terms of recognizing sex trafficking, someone may be experiencing sex trafficking if they want to stop participating in commercial sex, but feel scared or unable to leave the situation. And perhaps they disclose that they were reluctant to engage in commercial sex, but that someone pressured them into it. Or maybe they live where they work or are transported by guards between home and the workplace, or have children who live with or are dependent on a family member with a substance use problem or who is abusive. And possibly they may have a pimp or a manager in the commercial sex industry. And maybe they even work in an industry where it may be common to be pressured into performing sexual acts for money, such as a strip club, an illicit cantina, a go-go bar, or illicit massage businesses. So also having a controlling parent, a guardian, a romantic partner, or a sponsor who will not allow them to meet or speak with anyone else alone, or monitors their movements, spending, or communication. So if you believe you are a victim of human trafficking, or may have information about a potential trafficking situation, please contact the U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888, or text help or more info to 233-733. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, please call 911. And like I said, we are your local resource here at the Sexual Assault Resource Center, where we provide completely free and confidential services to all survivors of sexual assault, human trafficking. So please feel free to reach out and make sure to stay tuned. January is National Stalking Awareness Month, as well as Human Trafficking Prevention Month. So we will have more Teal Talks and more panels about these such important topics that need to be discussed. So yeah, my name is Patricia Butones, you guys, once again, one of the Education Outreach Specialists at SARC. And for all of my Spanish-speaking friends, todos mis amigos que hablan español, por favor, vayan a chequear nuestro sitio de web. Vamos a tener mucha información en español este año, so be sure to stay tuned for that. All of my Spanish-speaking friends, we will have more information, videos, and much, much more in Spanish available for all you guys. So thank you guys so much. You guys have a great, wonderful Tuesday, and Happy New Year. Bye, guys.